address this distinguished crowd. I know that Minister Yaresko spoke in the morning, so with the risk of being somewhat repetitive, nevertheless I will have to go through some of the very important achievements of the government and obviously the risks that the country is facing. This video was actually created for the German-Ukrainian Business Forum that was in Berlin just 2 weeks ago. What was supposed to be pretty much a small event for friends and family, for companies that really already do business from the German side in Ukraine, turned out to be the largest business forum of German business with government delegation of any country. It just shows that interest from the investor side, from Germany or elsewhere, is actually growing towards Ukraine. So we managed to attract 700 participants, basically as much as the room could fit. And therefore we created this video because always slides and pictures tell more than 1,000 words. And the good thing about this video that everything in it is actually true. So sometimes, we obviously do not see changes on a daily basis, but there is a lot of things that have already been done, and even more is in the making. Obviously, the most significant achievement of this government, which was sworn on December 2 earlier last year, is obviously macroeconomic stabilization. And let's just for a second remember from where we come from. I guess it was $100,000 of revenue in the treasury. It's $2 billion now. We had exchange rate fluctuations at the rate of 10% on a daily basis in February. Inflation rate was 14% on a monthly basis. In April, it was 36 or 38 consecutive months of industrial output decline. So with extraordinary measures, some of which were extremely unpopular, National Bank of Ukraine and the government of Ukraine managed to achieve fragile macroeconomic stabilization. We have some months of deflation already. We have industrial output growth from a low base. We expect growth in the fourth quarter of GDP, fourth quarter of this year already GDP growth. So I think that what has been achieved is great. And with it, the government of Ukraine, the National Bank of Ukraine is already preparing for the gradual removal of all of these barriers to trade, barriers for economic growth, which are temporary import surcharge, which are capital controls, which are currency controls, and so on. So government passed a decree already that from the 1st of January, temporary import surcharge has to go away. Now it is up to the parliament, obviously, to vote for it, and as we see from the events in the last few days, it happens quite often that it is very difficult to expect from parliament to vote on some of the very important laws, be it regarding visa free regime or be it regarding economic growth. But fingers crossed, and we expect them to perform in line with our high expectations. Also, that Standard & Poor's also raised Ukrainian rating and consensus estimate already for the 2% GDP growth next year, and we expect obviously 2–2.5% growth as well. These are just early indications. Much more positive impressions need to be felt by the business on the ground. We meet on a regular basis with the businesses. Yesterday had a huge delegation of French business ahead of a large French-Ukraine business forum next week in France. And obviously, a lot of problems still remain, especially when it comes to state fiscal service, especially when it comes to courts, especially when it comes to general prosecutor's office and so on. The good thing is that there is a building consensus within government and presidential administration that some of these very difficult and inefficient and corrupt organizations need to be changed in exactly the same way as traffic police reform has shaped in our country, which means removing all the old ones and inviting new people with a higher pay, new functionality, new mentality to perform their duties. And as you know, Venice Commission gave the recommendations about possible illustration of all the judges in our country, so fingers crossed here as well that all those 9,000 judges in our country, one day will be replaced by totally different people. When it comes to Ministry of Economy, our mission, obviously, is to pursue economic policies that are based on increased economic freedoms and on a much lower role of state, because country in early stage of transition, with weak institutions, ever-changing governments, very high sort of the tolerance towards corruption in society cannot, has not been, and will never be an efficient regulator or efficient owner of the state-owned assets. So the role of the state has to really continue to decrease to allow, private initiative. I would say that our economic policy is based on very much also three pillars. And that one of them is deregulation, and I will go into detail about that. Second is privatization, and third is fighting corruption. Because to achieve economic prosperity and better investment climate in our country without fighting corruption, obviously is not possible. If we start with deregulation, this was and will continue to be a #1 priority for the Ministry of Economy. We have achieved certain results. 40% of licenses that required conducting business activities have been removed. We continue to remove all types of permits and simplify procedures and so on. Not always as fast as we would wish, but there are some substantial achievements and good results, particularly in the agricultural sector and transportation sector. Anything that has to do with, for example, exports of grain, whatever was possible to deregulate has already been deregulated. I mean, 4 government decrees regarding easing of conducting business activities in the ports have been passed, how the ship goes into the harbor, how inspectors go on deck, how cargo is cleared, and so on. The last thing, the so-called form #2 has been removed, which was obligatory veterinary certificate for export of grains. Obviously, in 80% of the cases, importers of our grain did not require that type of certificate, and that has been removed. Those that do want the certificate, obviously, get it, and it's no problem. To me, deregulation is very simple. It's about removing billions of hryvnias from corrupt officials' pockets and returning that, to the business where it belonged from the very first day, so to say. And we talked a lot about also things like quarantine certificates. If the whole of Europe is one quarantine zone, then every rayon and oblast was a separate quarantine zone in Ukraine. And to transport grain from one rayon to the other, you had to get obligatory quarantine certificates from some institutions that got licenses to issue these certificates for nothing. But they were issuing certificates at the rate of $1 per ton, and obviously we're very surprised when this type of certificate became no longer obligatory. We have risen, some of you have noticed, in the rating of doing business from the 96th place to 83rd place, and even though it's a huge achievement, because 2 years ago we were number 112, I mean, compared to the countries that we want to be sort of a part of the friendly circle with, it's a far cry from where we want to be. So we definitely can achieve much better results. I believe top 50 by the next year's ratings when they are out. And with that aim, yesterday, the day before yesterday, we announced that we are accelerating the process of deregulation through basically through creation of a so-called Better Regulation Delivery Office. Everyone wants to do deregulation among the ministries, but sometimes the simple bottleneck is really people that write laws, people that come up with good ideas and so on. And sometimes bureaucrats are not the best people to come up with these ideas and to write these laws. So we created an independent office with up to 70 people, financed by the EU and Canadian government, that during the course of the next few quarters and a couple of years will deliver a lot of initiatives in the form of laws and postanovas to the Cabinet of Ministers and Parliament to simplify procedures. And they will tackle some of the main areas that business complains about, and rightly so, in the first place, which is simplification of tax administration, building permits, connection to electricity grid and so on, because it still takes 263 days on average to connect to electricity grid and get it, which is not normal. I think we're like 170 in the world or so. So it is very important to accelerate the work. There will be people from the business mainly, finance with market level salaries, so certainly their motivation is going to be substantially higher. Overall, there is the so-called deregulation plan, which was 212 pain points identified by the business with which we are dealing over the course of this year. Half of those have already been removed, and I mentioned some of them, and the other half is in the making. So after all those done, and there is many more initiatives that fall outside this particular plan, as mentioned about the ports and so on. Business conditions, I really expect, will be improved not only in the sphere of transportation, agriculture, but in substantially more areas. When it comes to privatization, I certainly believe, as I said, that the state is a bad owner of the assets, not only in Ukraine, even in developed countries. We have 3,374, I think, state-owned enterprises, of which 1,827 are still in operation. The large-scale privatization in our country took place in the 90s, like everywhere else in Eastern Europe. So the companies that are still in state ownership, they are not a very large part of GDP, but nevertheless continue to suck out financial resources from its citizens and from the budget, and that has to stop. Concentration is very high. In the top 100 is 80% of revenue and 90% of the assets. But it is very important to accelerate privatization. There are some old rules that were necessary to follow in order to start privatization, like throwing 5 or 10% of the shares on the almost non-existent, completely liquid stock market and pretending that this will be a price that will determine the price for the remaining blocks. So it is very important that next week on Tuesday, among other laws that concern economic growth and deregulation, that laws about privatization in state-owned enterprises are really voted in the parliament to remove 5 and 10% rule, that all the shares are sold in one block, and that would pave the way for transparent and professional privatization. Our view in the ministry is that first, Odessa Seaside Port has to go, that we get sort of a vote of confidence from the society, from the business community, from international partners to do more privatization. It's going to be a litmus test whether we really do privatization in a different way than our predecessors did it. State Property Fund claims there are at least 12 international strategic investors interested in that particular asset. We would really like to bring strategic international investors, not oligarchs, not someone close to this political leadership, not someone close to the previous political leadership, because these guys have done their part in privatization already in the past. And look at what type of enterprises we have. Completely lacking, modernization, completely lacking new technologies, and no presence anywhere internationally except for Russia, which just closed down and so on. So it is very important that the largest state-owned enterprises that will not stay in the so-called holding companies and that will be privatized, that these need to be privatized transparently, openly, professionally, with the help of advisors, and UBS is advising on Odessa Seaside Port, and that hopefully they will end up with the owners that will create jobs, bring new technologies to our country, and bring more investment. For those assets that are considered strategic and for various reasons cannot be sold at the moment but are of certain size, we propose that those assets would be bundled in the so-called holding company, and that company would be managed professionally, insulate management of the holding company and individual companies within it from political influence, and run it professionally with market level salaries and so on. There has been much already achieved on the state-owned enterprises, but it's not as visible as we would wish. Last year, those companies inflicted $5 billion loss overall, and the situation does not improve very quickly. Nevertheless, as a Minister of Economy, we already created new rules for selecting CEOs, and we meet a lot of resistance in selecting those CEOs. New rules for auditing these companies, and again, that is not as easy as it sounds. Of all 1,827 companies, only 5 have gone through international audit in the past. So you can imagine how these companies are unwilling to audit themselves according to Aivaras and so on. So also new rules for disclosing their financial statements, which is a norm anywhere else, but it has not been a norm here. So anyway, we're moving with the state-owned enterprise reform through centralization of the function of managing state-owned enterprises. This is a global trend, anywhere from Singapore to Sweden, from US to Malaysia. This is what is happening. Not individual ministries managing the assets, but there is a centralized function for managing these type of assets. But the most important is to accelerate privatization, and I believe that 2016 could be a year when state transparently sells the assets and decreases its role further in the economy. As I said, it's hard not to talk about corruption, and we obviously have to touch upon this because this is the integral part of improving investment climate. And I think that every ministry, can really play their part, not just general prosecutor or court system judges and so on. And here we fight corruption in our ministry through major staff cuts. We have cut 35% of staff in the first 7 to 10 months. We will cut another 20% before the year ends, so we will end up the year with half as many people as we started the year. I think the next ministry that has cut the most has cut 5% so far. I really do not believe that you can do much reforms with the old people that have been in the system for long enough. So the top 30 people in the ministry, including deputy ministers and heads of departments, I have changed 90% of the staff. And I guess it's perhaps desirable if the other 10% would be changed sooner rather than later. Let us see. Deregulation is a good instrument to fight corruption in the business, because as Ronald Reagan once said, and I continue to quote him, the 9 most terrifying words in English: I am from the government and I'm here to help. So we certainly are not yet at a stage where government can be much of a help to business. So we have to limit the number of interactions between the private business and the government, and keep it to a minimum until the state proves that it is an efficient sort of a helper to the business and continues to move in the direction of improved business climate. We also are known for removing the discount on Ukr-Nafta oil auctions. I am the chairman of this commission, immediately removed, also at the request of the business, among others, 15% discount, which gave a benefit of up to $200 million a year to someone who was notorious for purchasing this cheap oil, and a number of other initiatives. One of the most positive reforms that we are conducting is a public procurement reform, and it is really also about fighting corruption. We estimated that of 250 billion hryvnias of public procurement transactions in this country, 10% was always corruption, 10% was inefficient transactions. So possible, potential, and very probable savings amount to over $2 billion a year. First public procurement transaction in this country was conducted only in February this year. By the end of next year, everything is going to be in electronic format. This is really a good reform that illustrates how we can leapfrog many countries. Because now everyone wants to help Ukraine, and we really try to get the best practices that there are out there. So Miklos, former Deputy Minister of Slovakia, is helping on tax reform and economic policies. We have the Lithuanians helping us with the state-owned enterprise reform. We're going down the path when it comes to decentralization, down the Polish path. And here on the public procurement, we also get some Georgian help, because they were the last to do it. I honestly believe that at the end of this particular reform, because of the technological advances, we will be able to leapfrog, and we will have the most modern and the most advanced public procurement system of any country in Europe. To conclude, I would say that we're on the right path. Many things have been done, even more is in the making. We obviously know what the challenges are and where we have not managed to make an impact that we would feel. I think it's early stage of stabilization, after which I'm almost absolutely certain that good things will start to come. I would just say that 2015 was a year of macroeconomic stabilization. 2016 is going to be a year of economic growth. 2015 was a year of individual sort of improvements, putting down some fires. I think 2016 shall be a year of building new institutions, providing new instruments to lay foundation for the long-term growth in our country. Next year we will talk about industrial parks. Next year we will talk about export credit agency. Next year we will build new trade representative offices around the world to support Ukrainian exports. So I think that we're on the right track. There is a huge milestone waiting for us ahead, which is DCFTA agreement with the EU from the 1st of January. And overall, I'm quite optimistic, looking forward regardless of what is happening in the parliament and regardless of what is happening with the political situation in the country, because the worst is firmly behind us. I think government, central bank is ready for gradual removal of all of these barriers to conduct business. So I see that foreign business is looking at Ukraine, from French to German, from Japanese to Polish and Lithuanian and so on. And I think that we all looking forward to a really prosperous future. Thank you very much.
To improve the business environment and the investment environment in Ukraine. We are aware of your very tight schedule. We are also running a bit late, but we will appreciate if you can take a few questions if there are any from the audience. Yes, we do have questions.
I'm Boris Danevich from Marcin International Firm. Thank you very much for your presentation. And you mentioned that in the part of fighting corruption, it's important to deal with the source of corruption. And you mentioned the example that reduced staff is one of the way. But the issue of the level of salaries of Ukrainian public officials, unfortunately, is not very often being discussed by the current government. What's the vision? How to deal with that? How to deal with the 200 euros as the minister's salary in the country? What's your vision? Thank you.
When I assumed this job, I was promised that within 6 months there is going to be a transparent salary fund that will fund all the new people that are coming to the public administration. That has not happened yet. That is disappointing, actually. But it is important to continue moving in that direction. Without it, I think all the changes that we're making, they are not necessarily going to be very sustainable. But through reduced staff, you have opportunities to actually pay more to the people. So we started to reduce staff, and we kept the pool of money within the ministry, so we were able to pay more to those that remain. So people started to come in and say, oh, we can actually cut more. So people by themselves, are really encouraged. So I have people in my department that get on top of the salary now, 10,000 given as a bonus, which was not the case before, and so on. But that will not solve the issue itself. We need to really continue to find ways, first perhaps through some kind of experimental, public administration fund or salary top-up fund with the help of foreign donors. That's a fact. Then prove that this is an efficient mechanism and that brings reforms to the countries, and then obviously do it through the state budget. Our country is rich. Look how much money is embezzled through state-owned companies and customs and tax and all these other institutions, but it just takes time to put those in the right form and so on. But without market level salaries, you know, we are fooling ourselves that this is normal. It is not normal.
Thank you. We can take one more question. Yes, please. And we have the mic.
Yes, Henry Guillard, the Equinox Investment Fund. So my question is, how important in your priority list is re-establishing a functioning stock market, and what do you plan to do that? And are the privatization an instrument that can be used?
It's a good question. In my previous job for 18 years, I was obviously very much involved with the stock market, and it is not a top priority. That's really, I mean, let's be frank. Without proper also pension reform, which is planned from the beginning of 2017, it is hard to expect a long-term sort of institutional investor base to be formed here. The best companies, as you know, left to London and to Warsaw. Of course, such a big country has to have an established and functioning stock market. And here the good news that those that obstructed the reform of the capital markets, they were in Securities Commission for many years. All of them have left, and those that criticized those people now are in charge. So we have a unique situation that the likes of yourself and myself are in Securities Commission. It's a great team of professionals right now, so very high hopes. First, they cleaned up the mess with some kind of instruments that really were used for money laundering. I guess the next step is going to be really start building a proper platform. Unfortunately, two of the main exchanges here were owned by the Russians, so obviously it is hard to expect that we will develop those particular exchanges under the current ownership. But you know, my view would be obviously to invite as soon as possible, you know, major operators like Nasdaq or Next, Euronext, and really, you know, build a proper marketplace within a couple of years. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. We are now moving to our next